is a dog-eat-dog world, but in this case, we're talking about snakes. Dozens of snakes were released into the wild in North Florida to eat other invasive snakes.
Yeah, okay, the ones that were set free were raised in Lake County and then brought up there.
Balance that ecosystem back out by reintroducing these eastern indigo snakes.
A ripple of unease moved across the scrublands after the announcement spread through ranch towns, research circles, and environmental outposts. A new biological agent had been deployed in Texas, engineered solely to eliminate invasive pythons from the inside out. The moment the news broke, the atmosphere shifted. Scientists froze mid-conversation, wildlife officers snapped to attention, and local residents exchanged glances filled with a cocktail of hope, suspicion, and raw curiosity. The idea that a single creation, microscopic, unassuming, and specialized with unnerving precision, could infiltrate one of the most resilient invasive predators on the continent set off a chain reaction of reactions that no one could have fully prepared for. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The origins of the effort stretched back years, long before the deployment itself. Pythons had been steadily infiltrating southern ecosystems, migrating into the more humid corridors of Texas after thriving in Florida's Everglades. Each year brought more sightings, road-crossing shadows that startled night drivers, barn raids that left livestock half-devoured, and increasingly bold snakes curled beneath porch steps. Biologists logged their movements, charting their spread across counties where the reptiles had never been seen before. Environmental authorities tried capture teams, breeding sterilization, reward programs, and monitoring systems. Nothing slowed the relentless expansion. As the ecological pressures rose, so did the frustration. Small mammals began to vanish at alarming rates. Ground-nesting birds struggled to maintain populations, and even the natural predators, expected to keep the serpents in check, found themselves overpowered or outcompeted. The problem carved deeper into the state's ecological identity and eventually into its political and scientific priorities. That was when the Texas Invasive Species Response Division discreetly greenlit a classified program tucked inside a biotech research facility near San Antonio. The project operated under nondescript titles in funding documents, but those inside referred to it as the Internal Neutralization Initiative. Its aim was ambitious and controversial: to design a biological mechanism that could specifically target the physiology of invasive pythons without affecting any native reptiles or mammals. The research unfolded behind heavily reinforced walls. Geneticists worked beside parasitologists, ecological modelers, and toxin specialists. The team collected python tissue samples from captured serpents, sequencing their genetic markers and isolating vulnerabilities. They sought a way to thread the needle, something devastatingly effective yet strictly selective. After countless trials, the breakthrough emerged in the form of a microscopic agent modeled on a naturally occurring protozoan but re-engineered to target snake gastrointestinal structures. It latched onto a particular enzyme found only in the digestive lining of large constrictor species not native to the region. Once ingested or even introduced through a superficial wound, the agent triggered a cascading internal collapse within the python, destroying the lining that allowed it to process meals. Without functioning digestion, the serpent's internal systems began to fail. When the moment for deployment arrived, it was executed quietly. The agent was embedded into bait capsules designed to mimic scents and textures attractive to large serpents. Wildlife officers placed them strategically across known python corridors. Drones dropped additional capsules into dense brush where humans struggled to move safely. Along creek beds, teams inserted devices that slowly released microscopic doses into the surrounding mud, where pythons often slid through unseen. Within days, the first reports surfaced. Rangers described finding pythons weakened, immobilized, or exhibiting strange lethargy. Their scales lost the usual taut sheen. They moved with unfamiliar stiffness, stopping abruptly as if confused by internal turmoil. Some attempted to regurgitate their most recent meals but failed. Others lay coiled in the open, exposed in broad daylight, something they almost never did voluntarily. What astonished observers most was how selective the impact appeared. Other reptiles moved through the same environments unaffected. Aquatic life continued its usual rhythms. small mammals darted across trails in sudden abundance, as though sensing a shift in the hierarchy of threats around them. The reaction from field teams bordered on disbelief. They had grown accustomed to watching python populations rebound despite their most aggressive removal strategies. For something to penetrate the serpent's natural dominance so completely and so swiftly seemed surreal. Officers who had spent careers tracking these predators paused over the fallen snakes, marveling at how an invasive species, so notoriously resilient, could be undermined by something too small to see without specialized equipment. News of the operation's impact traveled faster than officials anticipated. Whisper networks of environmental specialists relayed updates from county to county, while social media spread grainy photos of weakened pythons across forums dedicated to hunting, ecology, and Texas wildlife news. Soon, local talk shows and online commentators ignited with speculation about the nature of the biological agent. Public reactions diverged dramatically. Some people felt triumphant. For decades, rural communities had worried about pythons slithering onto ranches and encroaching on farmland. The idea that science had finally developed a tool more formidable than the serpents themselves brought a surge of optimism. They pictured safer livestock, revitalized small animal populations, and the possibility of a Texas landscape restored to its natural equilibrium. Others reacted with fear. The notion of releasing a biologically engineered solution into open ecosystems set off alarms among cautious residents, bioethicists, and academics. They wondered what else the agent could do, even if designed with specificity. They questioned whether evolution might find a loophole. They asked what would happen if the agent somehow encountered non-target species or mutated once it spread widely. The uncertainty loomed large. Inside research labs, scientists monitored results with sharpened focus. Every weakened python recovered from the field underwent rigorous testing to confirm the agent's precision. Specialists scrutinized tissue samples, digestive remnants, and internal changes wrought by the microscopic organism. They wanted to ensure that its activity was exactly as predicted, that its reach stayed confined to the biological traits they had engineered it to identify. Meanwhile, environmental modelers began running projections using the early data. The numbers suggested that python populations could drop dramatically within months if deployment continued at the current rate. They estimated how quickly ecosystems might rebound, how prey species might recover, and how native predators might adjust to the sudden reduction in competition. The unfolding situation drew attention from other states and even international environmental organizations. Representatives from regions battling their own invasive serpents requested briefings or quietly sent observers to Texas. They were eager to understand whether such a targeted biological intervention could be adapted to address their challenges. Some countries struggled with massive constrictors invading forests, farms, or remote villages. For them, the Texas operation represented not only a scientific milestone, but a potential lifeline. Yet the more the story spread, the more questions emerged. Some lawmakers demanded transparency about the research process, wanting guarantees that the biological agent had no long-term environmental risks. Advocacy groups pressed for information about containment strategies, monitoring protocols, and ethical guidelines. While the Internal Neutralization Initiative had operated under strict scientific discipline, the public needed reassurance that the deployment wasn't opening doors to unforeseen consequences. In the midst of these debates, field workers observed a transformation unfolding across the landscape. Areas once dominated by python activity grew quieter and more balanced. Tracks in river dust changed from wide serpentine patterns to a more diverse array of prints: raccoons, rabbits, bobcats, and other species that had previously avoided python-heavy zones. Hunters reported noticing more of the smaller animals they hadn't seen in years. Birdsong increased in density around creek beds that had recently been silent. It was as if the ecosystem exhaled after years of pressure. The significance of this shift wasn't lost on researchers. They knew invasive species didn't simply alter an environment, they rewrote it. By removing a top predator not native to the region but allowed to dominate it, the state had initiated a profound reversal of a long-developing ecological imbalance. Scientists watched carefully to ensure that native predators didn't surge out of control in the absence of competition or that prey populations didn't balloon unsustainably. Still, the most captivating part of the entire operation wasn't the ecological restoration, it was the biological mechanism itself. Experts around the world dissected the strategy behind creating something so focused it could distinguish between one reptile family and another. This level of precision challenged earlier assumptions about what biological control methods could achieve. Historically, many such attempts lacked accuracy, risking collateral damage or creating unintended ripple effects. The Texas breakthrough demonstrated an entirely new frontier: microscopic agents tailored down to the molecular quirks of specific invasive species. Such innovations could potentially transform how governments and conservationists addressed biological threats. Instead of relying on trapping, hunting, or chemicals, solutions might one day be engineered to dissolve only the problematic organisms while leaving everything else untouched. This raised enormous philosophical implications. If humanity could craft biological tools to selectively influence ecosystems, what responsibilities accompanied that capability? The question echoed across think tanks, environmental symposiums, and university seminars. The conversation wasn't limited to science, it touched politics, culture, and environmental ethics. Some scholars proposed that the Texas approach might become a template for future conservation. They envisioned a world where invasive wild boars, destructive fish species, or parasite-carrying insects could be quietly neutralized using similar biological methods. Entire ecosystems could be rescued from collapse, and endangered species could be protected from non-native predators. Others countered that introducing such engineered tools into the wild risked crossing lines humanity had never fully understood. They argued that ecosystems were interwoven systems shaped by millions of years of evolution. Even a highly targeted intervention could echo in unexpected ways. The precision of the python targeting agent offered reassurance, but questions about long-term stability persisted. Meanwhile, the communities closest to the affected areas continued observing the shift firsthand. Ranchers found fewer signs of python predation. Fishers noticed a return of small animals along riversides. Hikers and campers felt more confident traveling through areas once known for giant serpents lurking beneath layers of leaves. Without using any formal frameworks or policy language, local residents understood something fundamental had changed in their relationship to the land. As the news kept unfolding, people from all backgrounds tried to grapple with what the moment represented. For Texans who had watched invasive species reshape their state, the emergence of such a strategic biological tool felt monumental. It symbolized a shift from reactive management to proactive control, from losing ground to reclaiming it. Yet beneath the excitement lay a quiet tension. Everyone involved, from biologists to lawmakers to ranchers, knew that such a powerful capability came with intense scrutiny. Even those who supported the operation felt the weight of its implications. The project had accomplished something remarkable, but it also introduced questions about where humanity draws boundaries in its efforts to manage nature. Texas stood at the intersection of innovation and caution, celebrating a scientific triumph while acknowledging the complexity it introduced. The deployment of the agent served not only as a solution to a pressing ecological crisis, but also as a catalyst for deep reflection. Scientists continued their meticulous monitoring, public discussions continued to broaden, and environmental policy experts evaluated what this moment might mean for the future of wildlife management. The world's eyes remained fixed on Texas, not because the story had concluded, but because it represented the beginning of an entirely new era. People waited to see how far the implications of this extraordinary decision would reach, understanding that something had shifted, not just in the python-ridden corridors of the state, but in humanity's evolving relationship with the natural world. What unfolded across Texas in the weeks that followed felt less like a simple wildlife management effort and more like the unveiling of a new scientific language, one written in the grammar of genetics, ecology, and the unpredictable interplay of nature's forces. As more field reports arrived, the scientific teams began to see patterns in how the environment responded to the precise removal of such a dominant invasive predator. These patterns were subtle at first: variations in nocturnal movement of mammals, changes in foraging routes, new dispersal behaviors among native reptiles, but they quickly became the focus of intense study. The python targeting agent had not just affected the serpents, it reshaped the behavior of countless other species indirectly. Without the looming threat of constriction in densely vegetated regions, smaller animals moved with a freedom researchers hadn't documented in years. Biologists revisited old data to make comparisons, analyzing whether the resurfacing of certain animal paths resembled patterns from decades prior, long before the first reported python sightings in the region. These discoveries led to a new phase of investigation. Wildlife officials began deploying motion-activated cameras across vast stretches of territory to gather evidence of ecosystem resilience. The footage revealed something that astonished even veteran ecologists. Animals were venturing into areas once considered python strongholds. Bobcats padded through gullies where they formerly avoided hunting. Wild turkeys re-established nesting territories near wetlands usually dominated by serpents. Even species rarely seen due to pressure from python predation, such as certain marsh rabbits and ground-dwelling birds, began showing up in increasingly frequent clips. This evidence sparked conversations among scientists about the hidden thresholds ecosystems must pass before recovery begins. For years, the python's presence had been considered irreversible. Now, as researchers observed animals returning with instinctual caution but noticeable determination, it became clear that ecosystems carry latent memories, a sort of biological muscle memory that activates once external pressures lift. Analyzing these shifts required multidisciplinary collaboration. Ecologists partnered with behavioral biologists to interpret the meaning behind altered migration patterns. Hydrologists studied whether the python decline influenced waterway usage by semi-aquatic species. Soil scientists examined whether burrow densities changed as prey species regained their foothold. Each discipline contributed a piece of a vast ecological puzzle unfolding in real time. While these scientific breakthroughs unfolded outdoors, the atmosphere inside academic and policy institutions took on a charged energy. Universities across Texas began hosting emergency symposiums where professors, researchers, and policymakers gathered in standing-room-only lecture halls. The discussions were not ceremonial, they were urgent, probing, and filled with conflicting perspectives. Some experts called the operation a landmark achievement that would redefine biological control efforts. Others raised sharp warnings, arguing that manipulating life at such a microscopic scale carried risks that humanity hadn't fully grasped. Graduate students watched the debates with awe. Many were witnessing, for the first time in their academic careers, a scientific event so impactful it bridged fields and inspired heated cross-disciplinary discourse. It wasn't just a case study, it was history in motion. Professors adjusted their syllabi to include modules about the newly introduced biotechnology, analyzing its structure, selectivity, and potential scalability. Students poured into labs to simulate models, run experiments, and theorize about what future applications or consequences might look like. This educational ripple reached far beyond state lines. Universities in other parts of the country added seminars on the Texas breakthrough. International institutions sent formal inquiries, asking for data, collaboration opportunities, or high-level explanations of the biological mechanisms involved. For many young researchers around the globe, the deployment represented the kind of transformative frontier they had dreamed of contributing to one day. Meanwhile, Texas agencies were dealing with a very different kind of response, one rooted not in academic curiosity, but public demand. Requests for information surged. Ranchers who had been dealing with python encroachment wanted detailed briefings on how long the operation would continue. Communities near waterways asked whether the agent posed any risk to fishing grounds. Hunters questioned whether the snake's weakened state would affect the natural balance of predators they tracked during seasonal activities. To address the flood of questions, state officials began organizing community meetings in town halls, school auditoriums, and municipal centers. Scientists attended these sessions to explain the agent's selective mechanism, walking audiences through its specificity, how it targeted a digestive enzyme particular to large constrictors, why similar enzymes in native Texas species remained unaffected, and how rigorous lab testing ensured its safety profile. Yet even with expert explanations, concerns persisted. Many residents had witnessed environmental interventions go wrong in the past, sprays harmful to pollinators, mismanaged chemical strategies, or containment measures that failed to contain. They wanted assurance not only from scientists, but from evidence unfolding on the ground. And while they could see python numbers dwindling, they were eager to know what safeguards were in place to prevent the agent from persisting indefinitely or spreading beyond its intended targets. In response to these worries, the research division behind the initiative released data that had previously been classified, models demonstrating the agent's limited lifespan outside of python-specific environments. The microscopic organism could not reproduce in the presence of any tissue other than that of its target species. Once a python system shut down, residual agents died off in hours. This information brought relief to some, but skeptics continued to voice reservations. The skepticism grew louder when environmental ethicists entered the conversation with their own set of probing questions. They began writing essays, speaking on panels, and participating in open forums, challenging society to confront the philosophical implications of engineered biological interventions. They asked whether humanity was prepared for a future where such tools became commonplace. They also questioned what moral frameworks should be applied when modifying life forms to eliminate other life forms, even invasive ones. These voices did not aim to halt progress but to illuminate its consequences. Their arguments expanded public discourse, transforming it from a debate about python removal into a reflection on the broader relationship between science and nature. Stories circulated about past environmental decisions that seemed sound at the time but later presented unforeseen problems. The ethicists urged society to learn from those lessons, to tread carefully even when victories appeared decisive. While these ethical debates played out, Texas continued serving as a live model for the world. Government agencies began compiling massive datasets detailing everything from python decline rates to shifts in the food web. Public universities partnered with federal institutions to monitor the long-term health of impacted ecosystems. Drone surveillance expanded, with AI systems sorting through countless hours of footage to detect subtle environmental changes. This level of monitoring led to new discoveries unrelated directly to pythons, but connected to the chain of changes unleashed by the serpent's decline. Scientists observed unexpected increases in amphibian populations, frogs, toads, and salamanders that previously evaded detection. Without pythons dominating creek banks and marsh edges, these species appeared to be reclaiming habitats with remarkable speed. In remote woodlands, camera footage captured coyotes adjusting their hunting strategies as prey diversity increased. Some predators that once avoided python territory expanded their ranges, exploring terrain that had long been off limits. Even plant life began to show signs of renewal as the disappearance of certain herbivores, previously suppressed by python predation, allowed seed dispersal patterns to shift. The complexity of these transformations attracted attention from environmental philosophers. They argued that ecosystems were demonstrating an inherent adaptability when freed from unnatural pressures. The python targeting agent had sparked a cascade of natural self-correction, revealing the resilience embedded in ecosystems when human intervention removed obstacles rather than imposing new ones. Across scientific circles, a growing belief took hold that the operation's greatest revelation was not the capability of the biological agent, but the ability of ecosystems to rebound once given room to recover. Nature, when no longer forced into defensive adaptation, began expressing its original blueprint with surprising vitality. At the same time, there was increasing pressure from outside Texas for access to the technology. Nations struggling with invasive cobra hybrids, overgrown anaconda populations, or introduced vipers in remote territories requested information or offered research partnerships. Texas officials found themselves navigating a delicate landscape, balancing the desire for global scientific cooperation with the responsibility of ensuring that such potent tools did not become misused or weaponized. This international interest brought geopolitical considerations that had not been anticipated when the project began. Diplomats became involved. Legal scholars debated intellectual property rights tied to genetic engineering. Regulatory bodies drafted preliminary guidelines to address future applications of targeted biological agents. The global scientific community, galvanized by the Texas development, began drafting frameworks for cooperative oversight. Amid all these expansions, the researchers who had developed the agent continued refining their work. With python numbers declining, they shifted their focus toward long-term monitoring. They designed new tests to detect any potential adaptations within surviving snakes. Evolution was not static. Even targeted biological systems had to be monitored against potential mutation. The scientists wanted to ensure that the agent would not inadvertently drive the species toward a resistant variant that could reestablish its dominance. This monitoring included genomic sequencing of any remaining pythons found in the wild. Researchers analyzed whether the serpents showed any subtle genetic shifts, enzyme variations, or defensive adaptations. The early results showed no such mutations, but the team maintained rigorous vigilance. Beyond genetics, surveillance teams tracked behaviors of the last active serpents through GPS tagging. They recorded altered movement patterns, changes in hunting frequency, and shifts in habitat selection. These studies provided unprecedented insight into python biology during periods of population stress, revealing hidden vulnerabilities and adaptive limitations. Meanwhile, policymakers grappled with how to shape future wildlife management strategies based on what Texas had learned. They considered whether other invasive species might require similar interventions one day. But they also recognized the need for comprehensive ethical frameworks. The python targeting operation had thrust biology into a realm where new rules were required. Rules that balanced innovation with caution. Advocates for ecological restoration began urging states and countries dealing with invasive species to consider such approaches, not as shortcuts, but as last resort solutions guided by strict scientific rigor. They emphasized that the success in Texas stemmed from years of meticulous research, field testing, and multidisciplinary cooperation, not from impulsive or reactionary intervention. Environmental storytellers embraced the events as well. Documentarians arrived with film crews, capturing the changing landscapes, conducting interviews with researchers, and documenting the subtle rebirth of affected ecosystems. They highlighted the personal stories behind the science. Ranchers who saw livestock losses decline, rangers who had spent years removing pythons manually, and scientists who dedicated their lives to understanding invasive species. These narratives helped the public connect with the event on a human level. People began recognizing that the breakthrough wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was the culmination of struggle, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to preserving the integrity of natural environments. As the months progressed, a deeper cultural shift emerged. Conversations about invasive species management became more nuanced in homes, classrooms, and media spaces. People debated the ethics of intervention, the responsibilities humans hold toward damaged ecosystems, and the fine line between fixing what was broken and controlling what should be allowed to evolve naturally. This shift influenced legislative bodies, prompting discussions about future funding for ecological research, stricter regulations regarding exotic pet ownership, and improved habitat protection policies. Lawmakers recognized that invasive species often resulted from human actions, unintentional introductions, negligent releases, or poorly regulated trade. Preventative measures gained renewed urgency. Communities across Texas also took on new initiatives. Volunteer groups began participating in habitat restoration projects, rebuilding fragile ecosystems now poised for recovery. Youth organizations engaged in educational activities, learning about native species, ecological balance, and the science behind the breakthrough. The python operation inspired a wave of environmental stewardship that extended well beyond the laboratory. The longer the ecological restoration continued, the more layers of transformation emerged. Biological surveys revealed increases in insects previously suppressed by altered food webs. Raptors returned to hunting grounds that had been too dangerous during the height of python dominance. Flora that depended on certain species for pollination showed renewed vitality. These fine-grained changes painted a picture of what happened when a keystone disruption, like an invasive apex predator, was removed with surgical precision. Rather than chaotic imbalance, the landscape began settling into a rhythm many researchers had theorized but rarely witnessed firsthand. This unfolding scenario also influenced how people thought about the pace of ecological healing. Previously, the assumption was that ecosystems would take decades to rebound from such invasive pressure. Yet Texas demonstrated that restoration could begin almost immediately once the stressor was removed. Some species, long suppressed, rebounded with a speed bordering on miraculous. Others expanded slowly but steadily, reclaiming their ancestral niches. Scientists compared it to releasing a compressed spring. Years of tension suddenly eased, allowing organisms to expand into long-lost patterns. They emphasized that while full recovery would take time, the early stages mattered profoundly. These initial adjustments would set the tone for future ecological balance, guiding how species would interact, compete, and adapt in the coming years. All of this continued unfolding as researchers maintained constant vigilance, fully aware that even success required careful oversight. The story of the python targeting biological agent was far from finished. The implications continued widening across scientific fields, political landscapes, ethical conversations, and ecological territories. Texas had unleashed something transformative, not merely a solution to a pressing environmental crisis, but a precedent, a shift in the technological and philosophical boundaries of human interaction with the natural world. And as every day passed, more people, scientists, citizens, policymakers, and observers from around the globe waited to see how this extraordinary chapter would continue shaping the modern relationship between humanity and the ecosystems it strives to protect. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Texas's new python killing method and what happens next today? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.